Hi everyone! Today I'm continuing my MBTI types compared series by looking at another type comparison, and namely this will be ISFP versus ISFJ. So we will look at the most notable, most important differences between these two types by discussing cognitive functions, specifically FI versus FE, SE versus SI. We will also look at temperament differences and some other more, let's say, general observations. So all about that in the next few minutes. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. So ISFP versus ISFJ. These two types have quite a lot in common in the sense that, if we simply look at the types, we see that they have three preferences that are the same: introversion, sensing, and feeling. They both have the same interaction style / communication style coming from Linda Burns's interaction style model. However, in terms of cognitive functions, we will see that there's a pretty big difference because they prefer very different cognitive functions. So even though they both have sensing and feeling as functions that, they prefer over intuition and thinking, the types of feeling and sensing that these two types have a preference for are very different. So let's look at the feeling function. In the case of ISFP, the hero function, also known as the dominant function, is feeling, and more specifically introverted feeling. So in their case, the feeling function is kind of like a reference function. It's the one that they prioritize the most, and it's probably the one that they are the most in tune with or connected with. And specifically for introverted feeling, this means that this type has a strong tendency to reference their own internal value system. However, I see a lot of misconceptions around this idea, saying that, ISFPs or INFPs know exactly what they value and they know more than other people, which, might be true, but it's not that black and white, in the sense that for someone who has FI as, a hero function, they are very connected to what they value. It's important to them to listen to their own values and to align their choices, their decisions, their actions with the things that they value, the things that are important to them. But it's not always that they have this concrete idea in their mind of what those values are. I actually noticed that people who have TI and FE, so all the TPs and the FJs, are more likely to be able to name their values with words, to say that, oh, I value friendship, or I value connection, or I value growth. Because the TI is kind of trying to make sense of the values with a bit more of an emotional disconnect. So then language becomes a tool that kind of helps them more easily access the values verbally or rationally. Whereas for people who have FI, specifically the FP types, they are more emotionally connected to the values, to what's important to them, without them always being able to tell you in specific words what those things are, because sometimes these are very abstract constructs. Again, if I'm to reference Carl Jung, who originally described introverted feeling in psychological types, Carl Jung was saying that a lot of the times FI dominant people are very enigmatic people because they seem to have this idea of what they value, but it's very hard for people who are external observers to understand what goes on in the mind of an FI person. Now, my opinion here is also probably that Carl Jung was a little bit biased around FI because it was not a function that he personally had as a very well-developed function. So because of that, he probably had even more of a struggle to understand FI on a more deeply emotional level. But anyway, ISFPs, more so than ISFJs, will find it easier to connect to those internal values and make decisions based on that, even though other people around them might disagree with these particular decisions. On the other hand, ISFJs have extroverted feeling, and this is not their dominant or hero function. This is their parent or auxiliary function. So they are more aligned or more in tune with what other people value, or what the group values, or what society values. And they are more likely to make decisions that respond to those external values or external social norms. They are more likely to, even to some extent, engage in a more people-pleasing behavior, because it's easier for them to understand that, people around them value something, people around them care about something or feel in a certain way, and they want to make sure that there is this kind of like social harmony or social connection with others, which is a bit more typical for people who have extroverted feeling, particularly the FJs, all of them. And again, it's not black and white. It's not like, the ISFPs will never care about how other people feel, or the ISFPs will never engage in people-pleasing behaviors. I know a lot of ISFPs who do, okay? And same for ISFJs. It doesn't mean that they don't know what they value, or they can't make authentic decisions based on what they personally care about. It's more of a tendency. It's more of what comes naturally to these two types. And also the ISFJ is not a feeling dominant type. They are a sensing dominant type, which means that feeling comes secondary to their preference for introverted sensing. I've noticed, because especially this function being the parent archetype in ISFJs, they tend to have a stronger ease in using this function to kind of parent other people. There's a lot of a parenting or a supervising aspect to extroverted feeling, which is a parent function, more so than this, hero dynamic that introverted feeling has for ISFPs and INFPs. Okay? In terms of sensing, the ISFP has extroverted sensing as a parent function or as a secondary auxiliary function, whereas the ISFJ has introverted sensing as their hero or dominant function. The difference here is, actually, I've noticed that a lot of ISFPs use their extroverted sensing in surprising ways in contrast to their introverted feeling. I feel like a lot of ISFPs have this abstract or idealistic tendency that is caused by the introverted feeling, even though it's not intuition. But suddenly they can turn into some of the most realistic people. The same as the other SP types, ESTP, ISTP, and ESFP. But I feel like for the ISFP, this is more surprising for an external observer, because while the STPs have the TI, which also brings a bit more of a pragmatic attitude, and the ESFPs are dominant SE users, for all these types, I feel like their realism doesn't come as much as a surprise to other people as it does for the ISFPs. ISFPs, I feel like, can go from extreme imaginary, romanticizing kind of perceptions to extreme realism, where they can be extremely practical, down to earth, and connected to opportunities in the physical world. And they can give people amazing reality checks, like, okay, this is not realistic. Your opinion or your perception is not realistic at all. Whereas ISFJs with introverted sensing are more connected to some sort of an internal perception of how the world around them impacts them. They are a bit less connected to these opportunities in the external world, and more so connected to how their experiences have impacted them. What's the impression that their experiences have left on them, which is why, people stereotypically associate ISFJs or other SI types with a tendency to look into the past or focus more on their previous experiences, focus more on tradition and rules, which can sometimes be the case, but it's not necessarily so. I know ISFJs who are not particularly traditional. They are just more connected to the lessons that they have learned through their personal experiences. And they also tend to trust these lessons and these experiences more so than abstract advice or abstract ideas, especially because this is their hero function or dominant function. It's the one that they tend to be the most connected to. And also, I feel like ISFJs can sometimes be amazing in terms of their own bodily coordination. Not all of them, because it's also a skill that you can work on developing, but a lot of ISFJs I find are extremely beautifully connected to doing something with their bodies, doing sports or other physical activities where they pay a lot of attention to these internal stimuli more so than to the external stimuli. Okay, and the next part that I want to talk about is the difference between their temperaments. ISFPs are SP types, also known as artisans, whereas ISFJs are SJ types, also known as guardians. So a main difference here is that ISFPs are very good at, or not very good at, but they are more realistic. They are also more utilitarian in their approach. So they have a tendency to make more decisions that they feel make sense in a more practical way or for the real world. And they also tend to be quite concrete. ISFJs also, as guardians, are more concrete in their language as well, because they are also sensing types. But they have a more collaborative approach to things. They prefer looking for ways in which they can collaborate with other people because their guardian temperament predisposes them to that, makes them more likely to try to make partnerships with others or to connect people with each other, rather than simply thinking in terms of what makes sense or what is a utilitarian approach to this issue. Okay, so these are my thoughts on some of the most notable differences between these two types. Thank you very much for being with me. And by the way, for those of you who don't know this yet, I will link this below in the description. I have a newsletter where every 2-3 weeks I share certain ideas with respect to the MBTI and or the Enneagram, and I also offer life coaching sessions or self-awareness coaching sessions. To find out more about that, feel free to click the link in the description below. And as always, thank you very much for being with me, and see you next time with another video on typology.